Hello, hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to another Aiven Live of Unlocking the Future of Kafka Tiered Storage with expert insights and what's next. And I am excited about this one because we're going to talk more about the secrets of tiered storage, of course, but discover what it is, why you need it, and how it revolutionizes data streaming. But first, this is actually one of the reasons I'm most excited is I get to ask them questions of who are each of you? And even more so, how do you Kafka and how do you explain it in one sentence? So to not make Datadog go first, I'm going to pick on Josep.
Okay, so my name is Josep Prat. I work at Aiven, and I'm the director of the Open Source Program Office. And when I was hired by Aiven, my first job was to contribute to Apache Kafka, and that's what I did for several months. And how do I Kafka? I'm right now do not have that much time to contribute to Kafka actively, but I try to do at least once a week, or at least one day a week. I try to do some contributions there. And how would I define Kafka? I could say that Kafka was a novelist of the 19th. No, also, but Kafka is a streaming platform that basically has a high availability and high throughput, and it's in distributed systems. So you can have lots of messages at the same time on different servers, and many consumers can read from those at the same time.
Very cool. Yay. And I'm purposely putting Francesco last because he's the co-host of the day and also the one that's going to be asking some of these very good questions. So Francois, can you go next of who are you, where are you from, what do you do, and how do you Kafka and explain Kafka in one sentence?
So my name is Francois. I'm a software engineer at Datadog, working in the team responsible for Datadog Kafka infrastructure. I used to work on Kafka for different companies before, and on some other streaming technologies for other companies. I live in Lyon, in the south of France. And how do you Kafka, or can I explain Kafka in one sentence? I would say that at Datadog, Kafka is our real-time data pipe. Basically, it's used almost everywhere to convey some data at some point. In very short.
I like it. I like it. And Francesco, since I had to purposely put yours last. Who are
Yeah.
you? Where are you? What is Kafka? And how do you Kafka?
Well, who are you? I believe you should know because we colleagues. I'm part of the same DevRel organization as you are, and we have been, I believe, talking already 5 hours in just the first 3 hours of your day. So yes, I'm staff developer advocate at Aiven. How do I Kafka? I probably try to use Kafka in non-conventional ways, try to create demos, break it, and find the boundaries of Kafka. And how do I explain Kafka in one sentence, more or less, is basically, do you know when you make a food order and you are looking at your phone to check where the delivery is? Basically, what powers the data going from the mobile phone of the driver to your mobile phone? That is probably Kafka.
I like it. I like it. And thank you. And yes, of course, I know who you are, but everyone else may not. And so that way everybody knows who I am too. I am the host, Jenn Junod, and I am currently in Phoenix, Arizona. I am a developer advocate here. And to answer my own questions, I'm going to ask everyone a question of, is it Kafka or Kafka?
Good question. I would say Kafka, but I'm coming from a Latin, so my native languages are Spanish and Catalan, so probably I would be completely biased onto naming it something wrong. But I guess it sounds So how would you say this thing in proper American English?
I feel like you're asking the wrong person because I say it like everyone else I hear it from, which I say both. So
Because the name was created by a person living in North America, in California. So that's probably how it should be pronounced, the way that Californians pronounce it.
I think it's Kafka, I think. But I've noticed that I say both, and that's why I ask. But how do I Kafka? I am currently learning all about Kafka and all of the above. I am loving the fact that we got to Francesco and I were at a conference last week all about Kafka. And also, I would say if I were to explain it in one sentence, I would say it's very different from other data types and databases because instead of having to have information pushed, it's something where people can get it in real time. I know it's a very basic level of what y'all just said, but that's why I'm here, is to make sure that we all get it and understand it on different levels.
I believe
So,
different ways to define Kafka is also how different people learn what Kafka is and what Kafka can do and how they apply Kafka in their daily lives as well.
exactly. And I am very curious for everybody tuning in, or if you're watching this post, do you say it Kafka or Kafka? Like, which way do you say it? Please comment and let us know because I am so curious. And let us know how you Kafka and how you would explain it in one sentence. And Francesco, are you ready to give all the
Yes.
questions?
Yes, I prepare myself with a lot of hidden questions that I will ask to our people in the panel. And we are here to talk about Kafka Tiered Storage. So I would say that we should start by covering the basics. So Francois, can I ask you, what is tier storage and what is tier storage in Kafka?
So for me, tiered storage is the fact or the feature that allows to store some of the data retained by Kafka onto an external storage, something not directly hard drive, I would say, which is the classical way we used to run Kafka, I believe. So these can be object storage, HDFS, or any other storage technology. To put it in short, that's what I would say.
That's, I would say, perfect definition. And the follow-up question is, okay, that's technically kind of interesting, I would say. But why do we need this storage? I mean, we just said that, I believe you said that Kafka is a streaming technology. Why do we need external storage, or why do we need storage at all? Why do we need tier storage in Kafka?
So I'd say that Kafka, so Kafka is a significant part of our infrastructure cost at Datadog, and basically the vast majority of our use cases are storage bound, which means the limiting dimension is the size of the disk. So we pay the price of hard drives, and sometimes we pay for expensive hard drives depending on the technology. And that being said, and probably as most Kafka users nowadays, we rarely consume from late in the past. But when we need to, this is, for example, when we need to read some data, or we are facing an incident where consumers are lagging behind. And in this case, the access pattern is a bit different from the real-time use case. It's more throughput sensitive, for example. And I would say, why do we need tiered storage? In short, basically, tiered storage offers a way to store the data that is more in line with our access patterns in general, like consuming from live most of the time, being able to backfill sometimes when needed with a high throughput, and pay significantly less money for hard drives that are sometimes very performant, but we barely not use them because most of the data is in operating system disk cache most of the time. So we're paying for something we're barely using, basically. That's why we need tiered storage.
That's absolutely interesting. That there is the just to go deep a little bit on some of the concepts here. I believe that the initial idea is that even if Kafka is a streaming platform, Kafka needs to store the data somewhere. And as you said, one of the beauties of Kafka that you mentioned before is not a queue. Once you read a message from Kafka, Kafka doesn't delete it if you don't want it to be deleted. So you can collect a lot of information in Kafka, and you can have some consumers that will consume the data immediately, some other consumers that maybe, as you said, you will instantiate a consumer in a month to backfill a database or an analytical database with a lot of information of the past. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what you're saying is that as of now, you need to keep all the information in the same expensive disks, while with the tiered storage, you can, for example, keep only the last bit, the latest data on the disk, on the high-performance disk, and then deal a little bit of for possibly throughput, but on this other side, apply cost savings by storing the older data on a kind of tiered storage, on a separate storage.
Yeah, that's correct. One thing I haven't mentioned, which is with our internal customers at Datadog, we're frequently having a conversation about their retention time because sometimes users want to have the data around for 2 weeks, for example. But in this kind of situation, we have to tell them, listen, that's very expensive. Like, you will need a lot of hard drives if you want to have this retention. And we need to stay, at the same time, we need to stay cost efficient. So we have to apply sometimes to say, we have to say no, basically. No, that's not doable for a reasonable price. And one of the very nice aspects of tiered storage is being able to increase retention for a fraction of the cost, because, for example, storing data on S3 is ridiculously cheap compared to SSDs, for example. Another aspect I haven't mentioned before is that, which I think is a very important thing to all the teams operating Kafka, is that the tight coupling between compute and storage, in case you're using local hard drives, is often a pretty important operational problem, because each time you need to rebalance your cluster or you need to replace a broker, you will need to move a pretty significant amount of data if you have 2 weeks of retention and a lot of traffic. And this is a problem operationally wise, because it doesn't go well all the time. Sometimes there are issues, sometimes you have bottlenecks, sometimes you have to manually unblock a situation, and it's generating a lot of troubles for owners of the clusters in general. And sometimes it's also generating a lot of cross-AZ traffic, because you have to replicate traffic from another AZ, and of course, you're paying for that. So in case you run on a cloud provider. So all of that goes mostly away with tiered storage. I would say, just in a very simple way, if you're able to reduce your retention by a factor of 10 and put the rest on a tiered storage, then you'll have 10 times less data movement, basically, which is a huge win for any team operating Kafka.
So it's an interesting point, because we have been thinking about tier storage purely based on the cost saving on local disk. But what you're saying is that if you're doing rebalancing, actually, since you have less data stored locally, you are saving also in network cost. That, by the way, if you are with Aiven, that's, we cover everything. But if you're not with Aiven, that's on you. The net or the cost of transmitting data over the availability zone can be big if you are moving a lot of data. With tier storage, there is no need of doing that for all the data, but only for the what we call kind of hot data, for the data that you have on the local disk. And also, I would say that there is a cost part of it, but there is also a time part of it. Because if you have to move less data, now you are capable of up and down scaling much quicker, in a much quicker way, because you have way less data to move around. And it's, as you said, also safer.
You also reduce your time to recovery by a lot, because you lose you have replication factor 3, for example. You lose a broker, and suddenly your topic is replicated like 2 times in some partition, and during the time the new machine is catching up and replicating the data, you're still replication factor 2. So it induces a risk on your data, on durability, basically. If you reduce the amount of data to copy before recovering by a factor 10, then it's 10 times faster, and you reduced your time to recovery and risk by a lot also.
Yeah, I believe that's the beauty. Like, we are not talking about a solution that is only optimizing in one direction, is optimizing across all the direction. Of course, the little penalty that you have is the reading from that remote storage is not as fast as the reading from the local storage. But I believe you, and we will go into the details later, you have ways to fine tune how much data you want to keep on the local storage versus the remote storage. So you can define those thresholds as you wish. Well, thanks, Francois. I now want to jump into the details of how tier storage came into life. And first of all, tier storage is a great idea, as we learned from Francois. What do we need to make tier storage happen? What are the components that we need in Kafka to make tier storage happen? And this is for Josep.
Thank you for the question. So the first thing you need is obviously an Apache Kafka that has the feature. And right now, there is no Apache Kafka version that has it yet in production, so that can be used in production. But Kafka 3.6.0, which will be released in the following days, even maybe today as the day of the recording. And once you have this Kafka 3.6.0, it's the first time that you have Kafka with tiered storage on preview mode or on early availability. So the first thing you need is, as I said, Kafka. Kafka has a concept of broker, and you need to have a broker that understands how to do tiered storage. Because you were mentioning before, you need to store things on disk, on local disk. And that's completely true. That's how Kafka works. You get a message, and the broker decides to share it with different other brokers, so they have their replication factors, and we make sure that that message is never lost. And if somebody is down, this message can be recovered all the time. And how this thing is going on is like you get this message and then you save it in memory and then you flash it to disk. And that's how it was until now. But we needed to modify how broker works to be able to push at some moment in time, whenever we define those thresholds, to push the data from the disk into a object storage, for example, or into another type of storage. And the first thing we need, as I said, is this thing. So we need a Kafka version that should be 3.6.0 and above, and then you have half of the picture. Because, as I said, that's only the broker part. That's the part of Kafka that knows that now I have a other storage. I do not have only disk, I also have this other thing. And that works via plugins. And afterwards, we can talk about why plugins and not just Kafka, but then you need a plugin for your preferred storage type. For example, at Aiven, we obviously are working in cloud, so we provide things in cloud. So we wanted to have a tiered storage on two of the most important cloud storages out there, which is GCP, like the GCP cloud storage, and Amazon's S3 storage. So how this thing works is that you have a Kafka 3.6 and above, and then you bring a plugin into that Kafka. And then thanks to the plugin availability and capabilities, you can decide which type of tiered storage you use. If you use an S3, if you use a GCS, or if you use your own type of tiered storage or tapes. I think somebody should write something like a plugin for tapes, like the old-fashioned tapes. Recovery time for this one will be too long, but I just for the sake of it,
I believe also for a faxing machine or something like
yeah,
this will
exactly.
be crucial.
Fax it to someone. That might be really cool. A good April's Fool's repository that can be interesting. So you have this plugin, and then you can make it work. Then you have every parts of the machinery to make it work. Then you have the cluster with the right Kafka version, you have the plugin installed, and then the plugin makes sure that it writes and reads from that set tiered storage. And in our case, it writes and reads from GCP storage and from Amazon's S3.
I have an analogy and then a question for you. The analogy is that basically, as I understand, the broker side is basically having Kafka, instead of seeing one letterbox, now it says two letterboxes where it can push messages in. And then the plugin is basically what it takes from the letterbox. So it's, how do you call the postman that takes from the letterbox until like where the letter has to be stored.
You could say it that way, even though technically there is a small mark in there, because the message comes in and the message will almost always, unless there is something really strangely configured, go first into the first storage. It will always go first to disk. After a while, after you define what type of threshold you want the retention, the local retention to stop, and then you go into the tiered storage, and that's what will happen. You can see it as in a like in a, you know, the movie like Modern Times from Chaplin, that it was like making, like it was working on one part of the whole industry line thing on the, it's the same thing. You have different stages of the line of the message, or until now, a Kafka message had only one single step in life, which was I'm coming in, and at one point in time, I will disappear. Mm-hmm. Now you give them another chance. You stay, you come, you stay in disk, and at one point in time, you graduate to another type of storage. And then you stay there until eventually forever, because actually that's what also changes now. You might not need to delete data, or you might not need to delete data that often, because as Francois was saying, storage on object storages are cheap. So one might now think, I can keep Kafka data forever.
So that's interesting. I believe you answer already the question that I have in mind about, now we don't need to delete anything or like it. But the question actually is, do we have two now retention policies, one for local and one for remote?
Exactly. So there is like two retentions, like you need to define now like two steps of the retention, like two areas of retention. Before we only had one thing. So before we only cared about what Francois was saying, like the 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 week, 3 days. And that was the date that we had. We only had 1 day, and that was it. So we only had either a time-based one or a size-based one, because you could also define it by size. I think not many people might have used this one, and many people use the days one because it's easy to think probably. But now we can define two different lines. So now we define when you enter, so you enter local disk, and then we define when you exit local disk storage to go to a remote disk storage. And then we define as well when the remote disk storage one goes. But you can keep it eventually, you can keep it forever. And I would challenge now to many people to think, can we do that? Does it make sense now to keep Kafka data forever? now that the cost might not be such a big problem, because until now it was, if you wanted to keep data, high throughput data for more than weeks, so to say, you needed big clusters with big disks that cost a lot of money. And if you're in the cloud, that also means huge CPUs with huge memory. So you needed probably custom machines or custom plans to get to those ones. So it was really, really expensive.
So I have just a follow-up question on here, and I believe it's for both of you. I feel the only drawback that I see in this kind of solution is that if we need to read from remote storage, now we are putting a little bit more pressure on the brokers because they have to read from somewhere else and then pass the information. The question is, I don't know if you have an answer or not. How much should we care about this penalty that we are paying?
I can take the first part of the answer, and then if you want, Francois, you can continue on that one. So there are two things that you might need to worry about. The first one is going deep down into thread pools and going down into thread blockings, or how does it work in that way. So how this works is with futures. So there is no active waiting on remote storage. So whenever you get a request for a message that is not on local disk, but on remote disk, what you are not doing is just query the remote storage and then sit down and wait and ignoring everything else that somebody is asking you. Like, no, I'm not here. I'm not listening to any of you. I'm waiting for that message to come back. That's not happening. What happens is what we call a future, which is you throw the request and then you say, whenever you're ready, call me back. I mean, in the meantime, I'm doing other things in here. I can process other messages and I can read them from disk, for example, or I can read them from, again, remote, which will be, again, future action. Obviously, that scales up to a certain point in time. So you have thread pools as well, and you need to like configure them properly, and you need to configure your also CPU, and you need to have a nice CPU as well, so you can keep enough threads. But that's a part of the, so that's how Kafka handles it internally, as in it doesn't block waiting for the answer. On the other side, the other implied question that you're asking is, yes, we need to wait time. So whenever, for a consumer point of view, we will need to wait way more time to get that message out. But that's something that probably you're willing to pay because it's not the most recent data that you're querying about. You're querying about something that was way back, quote, way back in the past. And probably your assumptions are that you might not need this thing in real time. If you need that, then let's talk about tiered storage. Maybe you need to keep it in the hot storage in the local disk, and then you need to pay more. But if you can live with that small delay, yes, that delay will happen. Mm-hmm. But the rest of the Kafka cluster should not be affected that much, or the implications on the rest of the Kafka cluster should be low. And Francois, if you want to add something on there.
Yeah, sure. I'll add that I second the idea of like, if you're reading from far in the past, you're not too latency sensitive, because what really cares about having data that is 7 days old in 2 seconds instead of 500 milliseconds? Like that's not a big issue. Where it matters is when you consume the data from the tail of the log, where you might have like sub-second latency requirements, for example, which is the case for us sometimes. Another thing that is a technical detail, but that needs to be taken into account as well, is when you're actually uploading the data to the tiered storage, you're hitting the disk, because there is a great chance that this data is not in the operating system disk cache, right? Because nobody read that data recently. So you will hit the disk, so you will generate IOPS, and that's something you need to take into account as well, because that's pretty much the same as having a late consumer that will hit the disk. You can see more or less that's not the way it's implemented, but you can see tiered storage as having a late consumer consuming the head of the lock. Yeah.
That's yeah, that's a great analogy, because at the very end, like in my image is like a consumer that wakes up after 2 weeks and now it wants to read from like data that was 2 weeks ago. And we could expect that this consumer could wait an extra few seconds to receive the data because it's old data. And as you said, Francois, before, the definition, and also Josep, the definition of old data changes by need, by use case. What a Datadog could be considered old data after 2 weeks for another use case of Kafka, while it's still very fresh. Talking about freshness, I believe I started hearing about tiered storage like when I started my onboarding with Kafka, which was a few years ago. Josep, can you tell us about what happened? What was like the steps into getting tiered storage to Kafka?
I'm so curious about this one. Like, I am excited and love the conversation that's been going on so far, because just knowing the history that's gone into this, I'm like, this is way cooler than I think a lot of people imagine it is. Like, they're like, oh, this is like a cool new feature, but it's like, no, like this is a really cool new feature. So I'm excited.
So I was doing some archaeology just before that, because I knew that question would come. Not because I have some script or anything like that. It's just because I'm really like, I can see into the future. I know that Francesco will ask me this question. So it actually predates your joining Aiven by a while. So in December 2018, the Kafka Improvement Process, or KIP, number 405 was written. And then it went into discussion into February 2019. But it stayed in discussion until February 2021. So that's basically 2 years in discussion. And that can give you an impression on how complex was this feature. For many KIPs or KIPs, which is basically the way that the community in Kafka has to improve Kafka. So that's be a KIP whenever you want to propose a new feature. Usually the discussion takes probably 3-4 days, and usually it's a silent agreement. Sometimes there are some comments or tweaks that you want to fix or change, or semantics that you want to clarify, or you basically explain, okay, can you please clarify why that thing, or why this other thing, or why this way? Can you please add something in there? But usually many KIPs that are successfully voted and accepted, the discussion is maybe a couple of weeks, maybe a month. That's what many of them take. This one took 2 years. And I was scrolling through the mailing list, and I need to scroll several pages to reach the last email. So it was full of back and forths with discussions within the community, within the PMC, which is the Program Management Committee at Kafka. So the ones that govern, so to say, Kafka. And there was big back and forth discussions. The feature was proposed by or at least Satish from Uber was the one that was proposing or discussing or opening the discussion thread for this KIP. I think the KIP itself was code-written, because I see some other one as well, like Shri Harsha was also writing in. Ying Zheng and Suresh Srinivas were also writers of that KIP. I probably butchered partially some of the names. I'm sorry for that. But this basically happened during those 2 years. Satish was the one leading the discussion for most of the times, and was accommodating every feedback that was got in. Then in February 2021, it was when it was voted. And that basically means that in Kafka, every time that you have a KIP, you discuss it, and the fact of discussing it doesn't mean anything. You still need to vote for it, and you need to have at least 3 people to say, yes, I'm +1 in this feature. I want this feature to be in. That happened fairly quickly in February, and everyone was, yes, we need to have this thing. But that basically is February 2021. And then it's when, around the time that you joined Aiven, probably, Francesco, slightly earlier.
January 2021.
Yeah, and I joined in 2021, but in May. So the Kafka improvement process was approved and was agreed, and it was meant to happen, but it was under development still, like until this week, basically. It was still under development, and there are still things to develop and to improve and to still develop and finish. But we can say that it took until October 2023, so 2 more years of building of this feature. So it was 2 years of discussing plus 2 years of building this feature. So that's why many people might think, oh, wait, wasn't that maybe already happened? Because I was hearing for such a long time that should have happened, but it didn't happen until now.
Can I ask a little bit of a follow-up question about the Aiven involvement into kind of this journey?
Yep. So the Aiven involvement is in several stages, I would say. So that was even like before I joined, actually. One of the things that, obviously, as I said before, which I said I might answer afterwards, which is why Apache Kafka doesn't provide the plugins for the storages. So one of the reasons is because there is not enough workforce in Apache Kafka upstream to support every single tiered storage provider that one might come up with. And yes, we can maybe support 1 or 2 or 3, but then why 2 and not the third, or why this one's and not the other one? So in the end, it's just a quote, quote, asking for trouble. So one of the things that also happened, the decision was, yeah, we will implement the broker that's under our realm, but then the community can provide different plugins for different types of storage. And that's also where Aiven comes in. Aiven decided to go ahead and implement the S3 implementation for tiered storage. That was way, way back. And if you go, if you go to github.com/Aiven-open/tiered storage for Apache Kafka, sorry for the name, trademarks, you can go into the history and you can see that commits date quite way back. And that was a proto version of what could be, with a proto version also of what tiered storage might be. Because at that point in time, tiered storage only lived into Uber's fork, not in upstream Kafka, but only Uber's fork, which is where Satish works. And that's basically where the feature was being pushed towards to Apache Kafka. So they had some version of tiered storage working, and they wanted to contribute it to upstream Kafka, which is awesome for Uber, and big kudos to Uber, and thank you very much for driving this one. Without them, this wouldn't be possible.
For driving this one. I mean,
yeah.
Like, that's a good joke about
I didn't, it was not done on purpose. It was an autonomous driver. Anyway, so so they pushed this feature in there, but then Aiven did the same thing with the plugin. So we did it with S3. But obviously that was not working with upstream Kafka, it was working with Uber's version of the tiered storage. Then during the time, so Satish was pushing bits and bits of the code upstream, and the review process was really complicated. And as I said, the feature development lasted 2 years. And sometimes the priorities of the team at Kafka were maybe not strictly onto tiered storage. There were other things to worry or care about, for example, KRaft or Craft. That's another question you can ask the audience, Jen. Is it KRaft or Craft? It's another question.
How would you say it? What is your default?
Craft, because sorry. I think of Craft when I see it written. I think of Craft because of the brand. But then when I need to say it, I say KRaft because it's Kafka Raft protocol. So I think KRaft. But when I see it written, I think about Craft.
That almost makes me think that maybe we could start saying Kafka as K AFK, like AFK away from keyboard. Yeah, nobody. Okay, it's cool. I thought it was funny.
It was a good attempt. It was good. It was good.
Yeah.
We can now play the game like the games with dad jokes that we need to not laugh and we need to throw dad jokes. But so where was I? So where was I? So I was.
So you were saying basically that
it took some time, right?
Yeah. Yes, it took some time.
It took some time to basically happen because there was Kraft, for example, that was taking quite a lot of priority, and Kraft basically is retiring, so to say, Zookeeper out of service, and it's bringing Kafka with a standalone version. So you need an extra guardian to help you control your cluster. And that was another priority. So probably that was one of the reasons why that might not have taken the first seat that other was. So during this time, obviously, people wanted to contribute, but it was hard to contribute. And upstream Kafka had only a really partial feature. Like there was only like the stubs and nothing really worked. And that was something that for a long period of time, you couldn't really do much things. You could go into Uber's fork and try to work there, but that was Kafka 2.8. And now we are at Kafka 3.6. And at the time that we were talking about 2021, that's when we created Kafka 3.0.0. So that's a major version. That means a lot of things broke between that version 2.0 to 8.0 with 3.0. A lot of things break. So that made it really complicated. And now if we fast forward to like, okay, we waited for some time, we wanted to see this thing happening, but yeah, priorities. So then we decided to look around and see who else was trying to work on that space. So we knew that Uber had its fork based on 2.8. And then looking around, we saw that LinkedIn had its fork as well with 3.0, which was porting Uber's 2.8 to 3.0. But still, we were at 3.3 at that point in time. So what we decided to do at Aiven, together with the OSPO team at Aiven, which we basically have people dedicated working on upstream, we decided to take all the bits and bobs that were lying around in the community and create a 3.3, 3.4, 3.5, 3.6 version, whatever we needed to create, of Kafka that would be vanilla Kafka, as in no changes from upstream, but will incorporate everything from Uber's and LinkedIn's versions. And we did that not because we wanted to just make competition to Apache Kafka, but we did that so we could test our plugin. So our plugin could be run against the broker with the latest code base. So then we could try it in production. We could try it with like fake production staging environments, or we could just give it some load, because until now we could only play with this plugin on an obsolete version because even the API changed. So what we could try was not even the reality anymore. So we needed to create like we were like Frankenstein at some point in time, and we were just getting bits and pieces of code from here and there. And we were stitching them together into Apache Kafka vanilla-like flavor code base. And code base is well on the Aiven's repository. So if you go to github.com/Aiven/Kafka, you can see there are some branches named with the version and then -tiered storage. You can go and investigate those ones, and you can see that we were doing cherry picks between Uber's and LinkedIn's repositories to make sure that that code base was working. And thanks to that, we could develop with the new APIs on the plugin, and we could basically build a feature-rich plugin version for tiered storage.
Okay. I like the story. I like the Frankenstein, how do you pronounce it, analogy.
And if it's German, it should be Frankenstein.
I speak Italian, so I can, pronounce it as I want, probably. I believe it's an interesting analogy, but I would say, in my mind, creates a problem. And the problem is that should I trust a scientist putting together pieces of various bits in a solution that handles my data And coming back to what Francois was saying before, the handle part of my data that I still think it's relevant, but I'm handing off to a lower storage. So I'm interested in Francois' opinion on how, for example, Datadog and you were involved into this kind of tier storage initiative. Because we heard the Aiven story, now I'm interested in the Datadog story.
So two things. So because we are pretty heavy Kafka users, we follow everything that happened in the Kafka community, every key IPs and new features in discussions. And as you described, Tiered Storage has been around for quite a long time. We knew that Uber had its own implementation, LinkedIn as well, other companies, Confluent too, and other companies. We knew that, but we were unable to use that because it was not in the open. And we also, another important thing is we are running on different cloud providers, and we are pretty, we already applied the compute storage decoupling strategies for a few things at Datadog, and one of the most successful one is called Husky, which is our indexing and log search, event search solution that is using object storage heavily. So seeing these kind of things happening in the company, it was interesting for us to try to do the same for Kafka. But we were basically unable to because it's not our developing on Kafka and contributing to Kafka is not our core business. Of course, we can do it from time to time, but it's quite rare, and we usually don't do that. So it was difficult for us to say, okay, we're gonna involve a whole team working on tiered storage. That doesn't really make sense for us. So we were looking to ways to make that. So we were very excited by tiered storage, and we were looking to ways to make that happen faster. And and when we discussed with Aiven, and we saw that Aiven was working on plugins, obviously this is the first thing we would need because we run on AWS, for example, and having an S3 plugin is very interesting for us because I think the Uber one provided HDFS plugin. And we don't have HDFS cluster. So and we decided to work. So we discussed with Aiven, and we said, okay, we can't really develop on the plugin or be too involved in core development of the either tiered storage or the plugins. But what we can do is test the plugin that's at our scale and see if it works and try to uncover new bugs, bottlenecks, contribute with improvement ideas. And that's what we did for several months. And it has been very, very productive so far. We identify some bugs that are now fixed, and and today it's working. Of course, this is a brand new feature coming with some rough edges, but it's basically working now.
Okay, that's interesting. The testing bit is actually where I'm heading to, because I believe, working at the scale that Datadog works, testing is crucial. Do you have any tips about the workloads that you use to test, or can you share anything around that?
So we have at Datadog we have many different types of workloads, different clients, different languages, but the crucial aspect for us was the ability to backfill from S3 basically, and with the diversity of our clients and workloads. We have generic workloads that we use for load testing usually, that use our internal clients and abstractions on top of Kafka, and we use that for testing. And now we are at the stage where we can use real application in staging environments to test things, which means we are in the stage that where the feature is working well enough so that we can use that on some staging application. So that's how we are testing. But the most important thing for us is testing the backfills, and we have various types of backfills as Datadog, so we need to test all of them.
That's really cool. Also understanding that, you know, there is a huge variety of ways to use Kafka, and now with Tiered Storage, this opens the door to even bigger variety of use cases and ways to use Kafka. I'm interested in, can you name, like, despite the fact that I believe, you know, every piece of software is almost perfect by nature, I believe there was like when testing you face some challenges. Can you go into the details of maybe a couple of them?
Yeah. So first, I think one of the biggest challenge for us was to acquire the operational expertise on a new dependency in our stack. Like answering questions like, what happens if there is a large S3 outage? It requires thinking and planning the operation and the automation that will be used in those scenarios, because we can't afford losing data if S3 is out. You know, Datadog is critical for a lot of our customers, and it's particularly critical when there are a cloud provider outage. That's when people will actually use Datadog to check if things are working well. And one thing that is, and this is quite tricky for us, because we need to build applications that are running on cloud providers that also need to be more reliable than the underlying cloud provider. So we need to think about all these aspects. Another challenging aspect is adapting workloads to work with a slightly different consumer latency distribution. For example, you may need to sometimes, maybe even though the consumer protocol hasn't changed at all, you might need to optimize for reading from object store or reading from live, and these are tuning you need to do. You need to account for the network traffic you're having on your brokers. You need to understand how it behaves in case you're draining a broker while consuming from S3, or rebalancing while consuming. All scenarios that will happen in production for sure, that you need to understand, test, and learn how it behaves to be able to build automation and remediation when needed.
Yeah, I believe that there is a good point that, despite the fact that in theory, from a consumer standpoint, there is only one Kafka endpoint to talk to, the fact that the performance and the workload, depending on where you source the data from, could be a little bit different, has also implication in testing scenarios, and also possibly some client details that you need to implement or you need to look after to cover for particular scenarios. I like a lot the fact that you're basically kind of in the strange world where you rely on object storage from the cloud providers, but when they're off, it's your time to be on. So you need kind of resiliency that is on top of the cloud storage of the cloud providers in order to offer the service that you are offering, which is really, really interesting from my point of view. Next, I believe we touch an interesting topic, which is we talk about Kafka 2.0, we talk about Uber version, we talk about LinkedIn version, but then Francois says something about trying tier storage with a recent Kafka. And I believe we missed the part of how did the Frankenstein monster become kind of a prince or something like this? Because now, as I heard from you, Josep, tier storage is coming into 3.6. So how did it happen?
Yep. So the work never stopped probably on upstream. It just that sometimes was really slow and it seemed that it stopped. So one of the things that happened is that we were starting to push on our like on Aiven was working on Aiven fork, trying to get everything around and trying to get something that was kind of workable. And probably there it was like sometimes some things were like we shouldn't use this thing in production. It hasn't been really reviewed, but it was good enough to try the things and it was good enough to check if everything was working. And thanks to that thing, thanks to, for example, Francois' team checking and testing that, we found some bugs as well on broker that would basically couldn't be caught in any way until the version 3.6.0 would be released, a plugin would be ready to be in production, and then maybe would be 3.7, maybe, if we are lucky. So thanks to this Frankenstein testing, so to say, we were able to see like deficiencies that would have occurred in the future on upstream Kafka. We reported those, we worked together with them, and at that point in time, K-Raft was ready, production ready, so there was more capacity as well, and maybe also like what Francois was saying, like the synergies of different teams, and then you were looking for, oh, there is movement on the plugins. Let's revive this whole thing. There is interest again from the community. Let's go and push that thing. There was a new driven push from Kafka to basically to upstream everything into Apache Kafka, and that's basically how we were able to report several bugs that happened on the broker side. They were incorporated. We did some PRs, we reviewed some PRs, we gave some feedback, and now we are at the stage that the first basic feature, the early preview of the tiered storage, is merged and ready to be shipped in 3.6.0, which will happen in the, let's say, next hours/days.
So this means that, like, the question is, I'm a Kafka fan.
Yeah.
What does it change for me? Like, what does it change for the open source Kafka?
So for the open source Kafka is now that you have a tested version, or at least pre-tested version of tiered storage, that it's not just a like a shot in the void to see, let's see if that works. So thanks to that work that we did all together, and where Datadog was thankfully was part of it, we could do some pre-testing. We could do some testing, some basic understanding of the feature works roughly. And there might be some rough edges, and there might be things that might need some extra operational care. But from now on, so thanks to this work that we did on the plugin side, together with reporting things to the broker, when Kafka 3.6.0 hits the release day and light and sees the light, we will have a plugin that you can just directly plug in on day 0, and the thing will work. And it will work enough that you can start playing with it and start experimenting with it. And as Francois was saying, you can start thinking about putting into your staging environments and see if the way you're using Kafka doesn't hit any boundary that is not yet polished. And maybe you can even push it to production.
So you said one interesting thing about you can add the plugin and you can start testing, playing with it. and maybe then, check that everything works out and promote to higher level environments. What does the play mean? How does tiered storage impact the developer experience of a Kafka developer?
So you were pointing at that before. So there is something you need to look at. So when you are a consumer, producer, probably not that much. I mean, producer, you need to know that now data is being stored for a longer time, and then that's more operational side. But on the consumer side, you might want to pay attention to which are your new reference dates that you need to worry and care about. Before, you only had one date, or one timestamp, or one threshold, and that was the only thing you cared. But actually, you didn't even need to know that, because that was everything that you had. There was no more data. Now you need to know that there is a moment when data switches, and it's the event horizon and goes somewhere else. So you might need to know that. That's what you were mentioning before. You were hinting at that. You might change the way you design architectures, or you might implement certain features. So that's what changes on one side. But where it changes the most is in architecture level, as in going back down and thinking how my system works now. I suddenly do not need to delete data. So maybe that Kafka Connect that I had, that I wanted to offload certain data, that it was old enough into a Postgres database, and then I run something there, or that maybe is not needed anymore. Maybe you can now think of different architectures, or use same baseline architecture for the streaming fashion works also for the batch jobs that you had before. So it enables not so much the developer as in day-to-day developer work, but more as in it might push people to go 2 steps back and rethink their architecture again, and think, how did we do this thing? Is still the best architecture that we need to do now? So is it Kafka offering us a new way to do it better, to do a better job? So that's one thing. And the other thing that it will change dramatically is what Francois was pointing at, is the operations. So if you have DevOps, or the ones who operate Kafka, this is the bigger thing that will change. Suddenly you need to rethink your Kafka cluster composition as well. So sizing, downsizing, as if, do you need that much disk? Can we split those things? Can we cat before? Can we, which type of remote storage? What do we do if X or Y breaks? How we monitor the load between those two ones, and the traffic between my nodes and the storage. Do we have multi-zones? Can we afford having different availability zones, or even different clouds? So there will be some questions that will come as well on the operational part, which is what Francois was pointing at the beginning. That was one of the challenges when they faced with tiered storage. Like, we need to learn how to effectively operate that, right? So how we can make Kafka work as effectively as we had before, now that we have this extra dimension that we can play with.
I have just a small question. I don't know how much this is, something that it's only on my mind or not. Can I use more than one plugin at a time? Let's say I want to have local storage and then the remote storage, both in S3 and in Google Cloud Storage.
I haven't tried this one. I haven't tried this thing. I mean, probably you need a meta plugin, because the way it works is that you will load a class loader that implements an interface, and then you would execute that. So what you probably need is, and you can create this feature request on our tiered storage plugin, is to create a switcher interface, so to say, where you can somehow switch between one and the other ones, or you can write to both, or you can do crazy things. But the idea would be that you need to implement the interface of the plugin storage, or like the remote storage, right? So Kafka broker talks to an interface for the remote storage that basically says, push things, so save things, give me things, please. And it will load this class dynamically and just call that one. So you need to have one. but you can potentially create plugins. There are multi-plugins.
Yep. I believe
if that makes
probably
sense.
creating
that's up
the
to
one
people.
for the creating one for the fax machine. It's my way to go.
We can talk about that afterwards. And
Yep.
I mean, Germany is speaking faxes, so we can probably in Germany we will have high adoption on the fax tiered storage.
Yep. Jen, do you want to take this next?
Yeah, because I have the same question for both of you. Yeah, I know we talked a lot about what we've done in the past and some of the things we do need to tackle going forward. Yet, looking at the future, where do you think Kafka Tiered Storage will have the most impact? And Francois, let's go with you first.
Yeah, so I think it will have. I see two different aspects of it. One is we often hear complaints about the cost of operating Kafka. There are a few projects that are proposing to solve that in some ways with Red Panda or perhaps Stream more recently and things like that, where the main proposal is usually let's make Kafka cheaper. So I think it's pretty sane debate, I think, and I think tiered storage is a good solution to that. It's part of the solution, at least, because the cost of running Kafka is, I think, in a large part caused by the inability to access cheap storage with decent performance before. So tiered storage is basically unlocking that. One other aspect is when I think about Kafka, it's been built on, bare metal machine running, having spinning disk, and sometimes, like recently, sometimes you look at Kafka and you realize that you can see it's been built for that, and you can see that it's not real. Like many people are running it on cloud providers, but it's not being thought for this use case. And I think tiered storage is one of the, in my opinion, it's one of the first feature where you see it and you say, okay, this is something that has been thought for people running cloud providers, which I think is a big switch, in my opinion. And I think when I think about it and when I experimenting with Kafka, I see a lot of, as I said before, there are a lot of questions that need to be answered and a lot of improvements that need to happen. And I think now that the feature is out, there will be so many ideas around to make the feature better and more reliable. That is very exciting.
Yay. And thank you for that. And before we get into questions, because I see that Oliver asked a great one, Josep, do you have anything to add to that?
Actually, no, I agree with what Francois said. Like this feels like one of the first features that is kind of cloud native, if we could say it this way. I think, as I said before, I think it enables new architectures or architectures that people had Kafka in mind, but didn't scale. So there were solutions where, Kafka fits perfectly here. If only I could store more data. And I think that will enable these set of solutions that until now were, if only, or if I would have infinite amount of money, which nobody has. So there was this if only, and I was in that case in my previous company as well. If only, then Kafka would be perfect for this solution. It was source of truth. You can keep it that way. Kafka has the source of truth, and then you subscribe from it, and then you do what you need to do. And you can keep it always a source of truth. But it didn't work because of retention and size and costs. So I think that's the key thing that Kafka Tiered Storage enables, is rethinking architectures. And make sure that now it fits. Now I can fully exploit Kafka.
Great. Thank you. And yeah, it definitely is giving me some excitement and hope for the future and what it's going to tackle. I am curious if either of you, and Francisco, I know that you are one of the moderators here, but you're like a Kafka. See, I even said it differently this time. Kafka genius. So, I'll ask you too. Could
That's
any of
stretching a
you?
little bit the definition of Kafka genius, in my opinion.
I thought it was the
Um,
extension definition of Kafka, not the okay.
Is it possible to compact data in a tier storage?
I will leave the reply to Josep.
The answer is unfortunately not. That was one of the design drawbacks that it's on the. If you go to the KIP 405, so there is a link I can share with people. Meanwhile, I'm talking. So there is this design document, which is where the KIP happens, and I cannot connect, so I will do it afterwards. I will share with you, Jenn. So the KIP 405 basically says that these will work with topics which do not have compaction enabled. And that's because the way that compaction works doesn't really work nicely with how data must be uploaded to tiered storage. So compaction is basically where when you have activation compacted, compaction activated, what it does is you go through the local disk and you remove old copies of the same message. So sometimes it happens. It's not for everyone that way. So Datadog might not even fit that case ever, but some other ones do hit it every now and then, or frequently. You have the same message referring to the same event all over and over. And you just care about the last one. You just care about the last version of that event.
So let's say that you have the user status and you just want the latest status. If it's online, offline, you don't really want the entire history of the user.
Correct. And compaction is the ability to go through all those old versions and discard them. So then your disk eventually will be smaller. Your occupation on disk will be smaller because those records in disk marked as tombstones, they will be eventually removed, and then you have a compaction there. So if you're old enough to know and to use Windows back then and do the fragmentation disk utility, that's kind of an analogy of what might have happened. So you mark certain parts of the disk as those ones are free now, and then I need to remove some. I need to just shuffle things around, but it's not exactly the same. But it's to get the idea. So the way that this thing works, that you need to go back in time, and you need to do this thing quite fast. So if we now think that tiered storage, the older versions will be on cloud, for example, on a S3 bucket or on a GCS. This whole thing doesn't work. It suddenly it's too much time, and that we cannot keep track of those things. And how do I know in which segment? So we need to keep segments like references to prior versions of the same document that point to cloud object storages. Then that doesn't really make sense. And then as well, do we need to go into cloud storages and re-upload something to say that doesn't exist anymore? But then we cannot compact that thing. So there are certain limitations that really do not fit nicely with compaction. Right now, as far as I remember, you can only apply tiered storage to a topic that is not compacted. But on the what's to come, these might change, as in, even though it's compacted, you will push things, but then the topic will stop being compacted. It will not happen again. So you will stop the compaction because at the moment, unless somebody comes with a genius algorithm and idea on how to do that, these two concepts do not mix well, and they create a lot of complexity that is not worth the effort.
Just maybe an additional thing here. If you take the analogy of the users that we used before, with a normal Kafka topic, you have, for each user, each change of state, you have a message. Now with compacted topic, you have just more or less one message per user. So the size of the topic should be way smaller. So I see that this, together with the complexity of making when making compacted topics work on tier storage, I can see that it's not the first priority to solve. I would say the first priority was to have tier storage working for usual topics with longer attentions, and compact topic, have it for compacted topic is something that maybe we can look for the future.
Yeah. And then again, if you go to the infinite money approach, you could also say, like, you could potentially say that you create a new object on the object storage that works for S3, for example, and I think GCS has the same feature, that the object storage is the object, the user data, the user X, for example. So then you would upload every time under the same key. Like you would upload on the same object on the object storage. But that means that you will have a lot of objects. That means that that costs a lot of money. You will not scale that nicely. So there are ways of maybe doing that, but they are quite expensive as well, or like not scalable. They might work for a small amount for a toy application, but then when you want to make it in scale, then suddenly they do not work. So there is a lot of rough edges and cases where that's hard. It's a really hard problem. And as you say, Francesco, if you use compaction and your use case is really optimized for compaction, you might not have that much amount of events.
Thank you. And Francois, anything you want to add to that one?
No, I agree with the usually the compacted topics are not usually the most storage intensive topics. So it often doesn't. It's often not that interesting to defer the storage to tiered storage in this case. Although I bet some have this use case somewhere. But yeah, and the technical difficulty of implementing this is probably overwhelming for now, or would require like just storage took 4 years to go out without this feature. Yeah, I think that it can probably wait more.
I get that. There's so many things to be able to launch something. You do have to choose and which are going to be the most impactful and successful and be able to add from there. And I love that we talked about at the very beginning of just being able to have like a voting system if something is actually going to be created. And for everyone that if you have more questions around this or want to continue the conversation, we do have our community, which that barcode goes over to. You can scan that with your phone, or you can go to the link up above. That will give you have you join our community so you can ask more questions and continue that on. But it is time to start wrapping up, which is, I know we had such good conversation today, and thank you, Oliver, for the question. And yay, hi, Floor. Some of the last questions for the day are around, it is October, which means that it is Hacktoberfest. So being that this is open source, Kafka is open source, what is one suggestion you would give individuals to like how to get into open source or contribute to Hacktoberfest?
Shall I kick off this one?
Sure.
So the first thing that I would say is do think about what do you want to achieve with it. So what do you want to improve? If that's what you want to do. So sometimes it's like, I want to learn a new language. Sometimes it's I want to learn a new architecture. Sometimes I want to learn more about project XYZ. Sometimes I have free time and I want to code something. It's fine. So, but if you have some objectives, as in I want to learn a new language or I want to learn a new architecture project, go and in GitHub, for example, or GitLab or whatever is your favorite code repository, and search for projects that do have this language, or they are using the technology you want to use, or you go to the technology itself. So if you love Kafka and you want to contribute to Kafka, please go to Kafka. Then try to find out where the issues are being created and managed. For many projects, it's GitHub itself. For Kafka, unfortunately not. You need to go to the Jira board of the Apache Foundation. And in there, you can see all the issues are created. There are several labels, and you can try to find an issue that speaks to you. And I would try to encourage you to do that. So try to find an issue that speaks to you, something that motivates you. And then read the contributing file that it's on the Apache Kafka, read the README file, and then start following the instructions, which is it's usually all the same. Clone the repository, create a new branch, start focusing on the feature that you want to implement, and then pay attention which type of feature it is. I would highly recommend to start with either bug fixes, documentation fixes, or small improvements. But small improvements as in Kafka Vault that do not change public APIs. Because if you need to change a public API, then you need to go with a Kafka improvement process. And I would not encourage to do this thing for a person that wants to get into open source as a first step. Do not go that way as a first step. Do some other ones, please. I beg you. So you do those things. You try to get one of the bug fixes, for example, and start working on those ones. And tag some of the people that are maintainers on Kafka.
Great. Thank you. Francois, any suggestions?
Sorry, I had a cat.
Any suggestions on how to contribute to open source?
Yeah, so my take would be pick something small, because I've been so many times trying to contribute to something too big, and at the end I get nothing done. So pick something small and just do it, and pick a second one, maybe bigger. This is my best recommendation, and enjoy it above all.
And I would add, if you think that Apache Kafka is too overwhelming because it's too big of a project, you can also go to the Tiered Storage plugin that we talked about today and read about it. Fix maybe some typos that we might have in there, or parts of the documentation that might not be clear enough, or bugs that you might encounter, or even feature requests like the Francesco's fax repository, like as a storage.
Or find something somewhere, any of them, to update documentation to talk about pineapple on pizza for Francesco. Like,
are you
update doc somewhere.
me today? All against me today. So
I'm not against you. I didn't say anything about
no,
you
because
today.
Josep, Francois, and Jenn, basically, you took out all the points that I wanted to make about Hacktoberfest. Because what I wanted to say is, even if you cannot write a single line of code, you can test something, you can report bugs, you can check documentation, you can, maybe there is the need of translating documentation, you never know. So there are a lot of ways where you can get in a project that are kind of not coding or not fully coding related. And I love technology. I love to use technology. I don't, write a lot of code, but I love using and putting technologies together and finding where solutions work or when we hit the limits. And that's the perfect way of saying, okay, tier storage, if you apply A, B, and C and do X, Y, Z, this happens. And testing and finding edge cases is very important, because if you find it while you're testing, you can avoid pain for someone else that will use it in the future in production.
Yes, that is a great call out. And thank you. And Yeah, I know. I get excited about talking about pineapple on pizza when it comes to Francesco and just bugging him about it. It's one of the favorite things in the world. Thank you all so much for joining. And we did talk a bit about how to contribute to both Kafka and for our plugin, which we will show the links again when we end. It'll be a screen to show all of them. Is there anything else that I forgot before we sign off today?
That's Kafka Tiered Storage is coming into early preview with Aiven soonish. Soonish. So I would suggest people to go to aiven.io to sign up, and we're using the link that we will share in a minute, and start checking Kafka as of now, and soonish also check the Tiered Storage.
Yes. This is the link to go sign up or scan the barcode. And if you want to contribute to the Aiven plugin, I'll just show it right now too. That is the Aiven plugin. So you can go contribute there, check it out, and then also to contribute to Apache Kafka. Voila. And Francois, how do people, check out Datadog and anything that you'd like to add there?
Just go on datadoghq.com and check out the project. It's just amazing.
I like it. Well, thank you so much all for the lovely stream. We look forward to all of your comments and thoughts, and let us know what you think about the tiered storage when it comes out. Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.